Welcome to our 23rd speaker series. We're pleased to welcome Councillor Josh Matlow and Mark Wilson, former chair of Waterfront Toronto. We will also have some additional speakers from the Waterfront for All family. Move to our land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we are meeting on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and we are now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, and we are grateful for the stewardship of all our Indigenous people. Okay, so before once again, I'd just like to do a call out. If your mic is on, please silence it. Thank you so much, and it's my pleasure to welcome this evening, for the first time to a Waterfront for All event, our special guest, Councillor Josh Matlow. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Edward. And it is an absolute pleasure to join all of you, and a pleasure to join this very esteemed panel. And I'm really grateful for all of you participating in both being engaged in this discussion, but even more importantly, moving that engagement toward activism, and fighting back and fighting for our waterfront, fighting for the autonomy of our city. And most importantly, together, not just fighting against something, meaning not just fighting against Doug Ford and his decree unilaterally of what he wants to do with our waterfront, but together fighting for a vision for our city's waterfront that has been decades in the making, of thoughtful evidence-based processes, of many people, including experts and communities, working together to revitalize our waterfront with new parks and livable communities. That should be our goal, I would submit to you all. Now, you know as well as I do that we live in a world where Toronto is not yet a city charter city, which many of us are advocating for. But, well, thank you, Mark. But until that day, while we still are the creature of our provincial government, we continue to wake up every day wondering what Doug Ford is going to do next. And while there were certainly, there's been a pattern of meddling in the city of Toronto since Doug Ford was elected 8 years ago, what he has announced now, by removing the city of Toronto from the tripartite agreement governing the island airport at Billy Bishop, and moving forward with the legislation to expropriate, to grab our city's land on the Toronto Islands and in the Bathurst Quay neighborhood, including Little Norway Park, is without a doubt an unprecedented attack on Toronto. We've never experienced this before. And while Doug Ford and Minister Sarkaria is trying to reassure the media that Little Norway Park will remain, they have not said exactly what percentage will remain. I was just playing softball with the group at the Downtown Softball League last Sunday, and very well we could lose the baseball diamond, we could lose the playground closest to the water. Who knows what it'll be? Will it be a road? Will it be a parking lot? Certainly, if you're expecting millions of more passengers at Billy Bishop, there will have to be a way to accommodate transportation getting there and then being there. So what's the plan? Well, Doug Ford has made an announcement that he wants to increase the use of Billy Bishop. He wants to expand the runway. He wants to have long-haul flights, and he wants to introduce jets. What he has not done is actually proposed any plan that anyone has been able to review, at least not that we're aware of. There are no answers yet in the public realm as to exactly how long the runway will be, although the Port Authority itself has suggested that it would be an extension of another 900 meters, which, as I wrote the other day, would be in length the same. It would be in height taller than the Burj Khalifa, the tallest building in the entire world in Dubai. We still don't know what the plans will be for the giant blast wall that would have to be built. We don't know if there's a transportation plan, as I was alluding to earlier, to accommodate all the new cars and traffic on Lakeshore, which already is congested and difficult to deal with. We do not know exactly what the impact will be on the province and federal government's housing targets along the waterfront and in particular in the Portlands, but we do know that it will be sizable, literally, meaning that there will be an impact because they will have to, NavCan will prescribe that the flight path will have to be lower for safety for the jets. It will impact the number of units massively that can be built in the new Aquaman-Minising neighborhood in the Portlands area. And that will mean that will also most likely impact any scheme to provide as much affordable housing units as we would like to see as well. Doug Ford, by making a unilateral announcement, just pushing ahead with this need to bring jets to the island airport, has not given any thought, or maybe he just doesn't care, to the massive consequences for making such a consequential decision. And so that's why when this was first announced, not only did the mayor and council act literally the day that it was formally announced that the legislation was going to move forward to oppose what Doug Ford is doing, but also make it very clear that there needs to be a thoughtful process. This needs to be guided by facts. I believe that our audience is not Doug Ford. Doug Ford is acting hostile toward Toronto and the people of Toronto. And I would add, this should come as no surprise to anybody. He's behaved the same way with respect to Ontario Place, the Science Centre, road safety, planning, and so many other ways. He's been hostile to the people of Toronto. And as Doug Ford has said about Donald Trump, you can't roll over to bullies. You need to fight back. And Doug Ford is no exception to that rule. So we have to fight back. We have to push back hard. And we have to take a very clear stand that this isn't about governments fighting or parties fighting or left-wing and right-wingers fighting or any of that. This is about having a waterfront for all. If you were to stand at the playground as I did just 2 days ago at Little Norway Park, you will see a small regional airport across the gap that a lot of people actually love. And some of you may, not even want the airport there, but I must say a lot of people enjoy it because it's a small regional airport that's easy to deal with. They don't want a Pearson by the lake. They enjoy it because of what it is today. And it lives in balance with a playground, a baseball diamond, a vibrant park, a beautiful neighborhood full of beautiful people, schools, a community center, and a community that's going to grow, and a community that wants to welcome more people and more affordable places to live. That's the balance, that's the equilibrium that we're trying to work toward. Through Waterfront Toronto, there's been a many-decade effort to bring new parks, more green spaces, more livable communities, and finding that balance. In fact, Waterfront Toronto's mandate is to have no one use of our waterfront usurp or override or neglect any other purpose. It all needs to work together. Doug Ford wants his runway to take over everything else, and that's not acceptable. It's not good public policy, and it's not good for Toronto. It's not even good for economic development. What a bunk argument. All the construction, all the work that can go into doing all this remarkable, visionary work on our waterfront will be neglected and even broken if he gets his way. And there's other work being done too. We just announced this, I think, really exciting vision for Exhibition Place. And by the way, Doug Ford has also moved legislation that he can take Exhibition Place lands if he wants to. So we're keeping an eye on that. But there's a new vision for Exhibition Place, to redevelop it into a 365-day-a-year event space that can be animated and exciting and bring people there more than just a couple weeks at the end of August. There are so many things happening. Bethesda Gay Park in the Portlands, the new neighborhood. What a world-class effort that new park is. I've often complained that Toronto has sought the height of mediocrity when it comes to designing public space. But that park is a world-class park. And tomorrow at Planning Committee, which I'm a member of, we're going to be discussing the new Aquamin-Minising neighborhood with a beautiful pedestrianized street, great neighborhoods, great quality of life, and with more units to address the housing crisis that we're in, to bring more supply, and that can then pay for true affordable housing projects. There is a plan that we need to fight for, a well thought out, decades long, thoughtful, evidence-based plan that finally, after so many decades, is actually coming through to fruition. We're seeing it come out of the ground. It's exciting. Unfortunately, it's not something that many Torontonians really know about. Too many Torontonians on the north side of the Gardiner are unaware sometimes that they even live along a lake. So we need to remind them of that, and we need to engage them in this vision. We need to encourage them to bring forward their ideas with purpose, with intention, with excitement, and with an aspirational goal to make sure that our waterfront is a place for economic development, a place for housing, a place for parks, a place for boaters, a place for kayakers, a place for swimmers, a place for walkers, and yes, a place that you can drive along lakeshore and not have crazy congestion the way the Doug Ford will create. And most importantly, it's a place for people and a place for everyone. So who is our audience? It's not Doug Ford. It's not Minister Sarkaria, even though I did invite him to play softball with me the other day. The idea is that if you saw how wonderful the park was, you might want to protect it. Our audience is the federal government. The federal government has the ability and the power to not only put a stop to this, but put a start to the vision that I described, the one that I believe all of you share. And even though the province does have the constitutional ability to remove Toronto from the tripartite agreement, the federal government, Transport Canada, will still be there. And they have the ability, not only because of their role, but also because of their power, frankly, over the water and the air, and funding that will have to go into anything that moves forward. They have the ability to steer this in the right direction and land this plane safely. We do know that Prime Minister Carney has already said that he's open to Doug Ford's vision, to paraphrase him. And I do know that there are many members of the 416 Liberal caucus that are enthusiastic about the idea of expanding the airport. Not all of them, though. It's an active discussion. But I also believe that Prime Minister Carney is a grown-up and wants to behave like one. And I believe that if we can demonstrate enough evidence that even a vision that he might be open to may not be exactly the best deal around, he could come around. The Government of Canada has significant housing targets that they want to achieve to help be part of the solution with the affordability crisis. We need to demonstrate to them, and that's why I moved a motion at Council to collect evidence on exactly what the impact will be on those housing targets in the Portlands if the JETS plan moves forward. We need to demonstrate to the federal government that it actually conflicts with their interests and their priorities. Prime Minister Carney has also said that he wants to build big, which I support. I think it's exciting that we want to put Canadians to work. We want to invest in the Canadian economy. We want to build big things. And we've got wonderful big things to build. We should be having the federal government invest in the Scarborough East LRT, formerly the Eglinton East LRT. We should continue investing in our waterfront plan, into revitalizing institutions. I would submit even the Old Ontario Science Centre. There's wonderful projects that the federal government should be a partner in and be able to cut a ribbon for. And we need to make the case to the federal government that both politically and altruistically, in the interests of the people of Toronto, Ontario, and Canada, in the interest of economic development, livability, housing affordability, and so much more, that we should be supporting the regional airport that we have that can live in balance with the rest of the waterfront plan. And I know that that will be controversial amongst some of you because some of you may not want the airport at all. But that's not what the public is open to today. And I also believe that along with convincing the federal government, and I for one, and I know a few of you have been on the phone with I won't go through the list because those are conversations that I honor and respect, but I'm on the phone talking to as many friends as possible in Ottawa. But our other audience is, of course, the public. You know, polls have shown, and by the way, ironically, Doug Ford first announced this by saying that he was influenced by a poll without consulting with anybody on the ground. But polls have shown that it's a split. Some people support jets, some people don't. But if you dig into the polls and you ask people the next question about the details, like if you just ask, hey, do you think it would be really cool to be able to fly to like Vienna for the weekend from downtown Toronto? That sounds cool. Why not? That sounds fun. You know, hey, maybe take a quick beach vacation. Sounds cool. Love it. But then if you ask them the next question, what if this impacts housing affordability? What if this increases congestion downtown? What if this has the most massive runway you could ever dream of or nightmare of, covering up our lake? What if this leads to displacement of people in the waterfront area, including the Toronto Islands? What if this actually screws up our waterfront? I think a lot of people then go, okay, well, yeah, maybe that wasn't as wonderful as advertised. And frankly, most of my conversations go that way. From people who initially are really excited about the idea and then go, oh, wait a sec, there's other things to think about. If only Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, would actually think of the next thought, it would be helpful. Because again, consequential decisions have serious consequences. I'd also remind us that even the convenience argument for a lot of people, unless you actually live near Little Norway Park, it's actually not as easy to get to Billy Bishop Airport for a lot of people who live in Midtown, the north part of the city, Scarborough, and beyond. It's not as easy to get to Billy Bishop often than hopping in a cab and getting over to Pearson on the 401, depending on the hour of the day or night, or taking the UP Express. In other words, the way that this has been advertised is a lot of false advertising. It sounds exciting and cool until you consider the details. And ultimately, and I'll conclude on this, I know that there's a lot of, and some of you may feel this way too, there's a lot of a feeling of exasperation and defeatism amongst people who care about our city because Doug Ford keeps flooding the zone, and like every day, sometimes several times a day, there's another announcement about something that's going to hurt people, whether it be impacting in education, healthcare, rural communities, and Toronto. Toronto seems to be there's a trending pattern of announcements about Toronto. He seems to have something against Toronto. I digress again. But there have been times when the public has stood up and pushed back that the Ford government has capitulated. The Greenbelt, he capitulated. There are a number of times, his own private jet, he capitulated. And I'll conclude by saying that if we push back, fight back, convince the public of a thoughtful and exciting vision for the waterfront, talk about what's wrong with his plan, that again, it's not a plan, it's an announcement, but then sell and discuss the plan that we actually have, I believe we're going to be successful. And we're going to be successful because of your efforts. And I'm proud to be part of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Josh. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you here. I'm now going to ask our next speaker. Oh, so I should say too, shouldn't I, that as a busy city councillor serving the people of Toronto and his constituents, he may, right, have to dash off. But Josh has said he's going to hang around for as long as he can, um, but he may have to leave. So we're going to move to
I'm
our
going to jump.
next.
I'm going to jump
Oh,
in,
jump in. You want to ask a question?
if I may. Yeah. Thank you,
Yeah,
first of all, very
please.
much, Josh, for your attention to this problem. I think you've kind of taken the lead on City Council, and I'm thrilled that you're doing it. A couple of questions. I guess I'm interested in your thoughts about what the city's role is and will continue to be. It would seem to me that regardless of the effects of the province to sort of kick the city out of it and say to sit down and shut up, or whatever it is, exactly that they're saying, that the city has deep responsibilities, in particular to sort of inquire as to the effects. And you brought a motion, of course, as you mentioned, with respect to the housing, which passed in the planning committee. There was a sort of a companion motion, I think, which was by, I believe, Paula Fletcher and Osman Malik. It had to do with transportation effects as well. There are a lot of other areas that need to be looked into, and all of these areas require a lot of expert scrutiny. There's just all kinds of things: transportation, parking. There's the water quality, which might be affected by the drift. There's just all kinds of stuff. It's not simple. It requires expert input, all of it. And the city, I would submit, has to play a very important fact-finding role and has to advise council, and council in the end has to take a position. And it would seem to me that in the end, the federal government can either sort of adopt the city council's position, or they could say we're overruling it. The second thing seems kind of unlikely to me. But anyway, I just sort of wanted to get your thoughts on what it is, what are the responsibilities of the city right now in the situation that we're in on this?
Oh, you have to you have to unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you.
There we
Yeah, I
are.
wasn't
Thank you.
able to do it until you gave me permission. So
Okay.
yeah, thank you. See, whether it be the province or you, we can't do it on our own.
Sorry about that. It's in section 92. I know it is.
That's right. Yeah, no, happy to answer that. So, I mean, I believe, and I mentioned the Science Center, I mentioned Ontario Place, as well, and I moved a motion for the City of Toronto to intervene in the Supreme Court hearing regarding Ontario Place to support the Ontario Place protectors, and I've been working with activists and residents and architects on the Science Center, because I believe the City of Toronto has a moral and frankly just integral role in advocating for our city. That's the point. That's why we're there. That's why we're elected. That's what we promised to do, or some of us did. And I also believe that when citizens are willing to take a stand, then City Hall should have their back, actively, with all the resources that we can bring to bear. So I just say that as a principled statement that we have a responsibility, regardless of what the province does, to continue fighting. As I mentioned earlier, I do believe that our audience is both the Prime Minister and the 416 Caucus, along with the public, and that's why we need to make the case. The Premier has just said it'll be awesome and wonderful, and let's do this, but he has not actually presented a formal plan as to what this looks like and what the impacts will be, etc. So that's why, while we are, and I know I see Paul Bedford there, and people like Ken Greenberg and others, these great Torontonians, are we're all working together on bringing forward visions so that we are not just fighting something, but we're bringing something forward, which is critical. Be propositional rather than just oppositional. I also think that the best way to combat it is not just with anger, but with facts. And that's why I have been moving motions along with some of my colleagues to use the city resources and our staff, our great professional staff, to show, like, this is what will happen if you do A. This is what will happen if you do B. Demonstrate to the Prime Minister, demonstrate to the reasonable, thoughtful public that even if you like the idea, again, of a long haul flight from the island, this is the consequence. This is the price to pay. Are you willing to pay that? And many people, once they see the facts, will reconsider perhaps their initial excitement. And that's certainly what I've been experiencing. I also believe that part of the ask of the federal government, and I have been, and I want to, acknowledge the 416 Liberals. While, there is criticism of them that they haven't taken like an unequivocal stand yet. Um, what I've read from them, and I want to take this at face value, that they respect that Toronto needs to still play a role at the table. So even though, yes, they can't tell Doug Ford what Doug Ford is going to do, as long as they're still a player, what I'm asking them to do is still ensure that Toronto is treated as a partner, not just a stakeholder, but as a partner through this discussion, even if it's a bilateral conversation with the federal government, if the province doesn't want to take part in that directly with us. Because the government has been saying consistently that they respect cities. And so let's take them at their word. If they respect cities, then let's continue that respectful relationship. That's the way it should. That's what people want out of government. They want governments to be respectful and work as partners. So until the answer is no, let's work toward yes. And then ultimately, um, as wherever we find points of leverage, whether it be the courts, whether it be any of the studies or assessments that will have to come forward. And by the way, just to give you something that I've heard from the feds, they don't expect this to be a quick process. They expect this to be a long discussion. So we also have time to collect a lot of that data, a lot of those facts. And I expect that wherever we just have a place where we can play a role, whether it be a court, whether it be at the table with the feds, whether it be engaging the public about a vision that they should get behind, that's our role.
I just thought thank you for that. I just thought I'd say one more thing. I have the book here. I have Ken's book. Maybe it doesn't show up very well on
Toronto.
this thing, but it's Saving Toronto, edited by Ken Greenberg. Ken, if you're here, it's fantastic. I love it. Ann Golden. Josh has written a chapter, Making Local Government Work, which I strongly recommend. And I recommend the whole book to anybody who's interested in the city at all.
And may I say, just out of important courtesy, before I sign off, I also just want to acknowledge that you said very kind words about me, and I'm like, I believe I'm doing my job, and it's my passion, both as a councillor but as a Torontonian who regularly kayaks at the waterfront, loves the islands, loves like I personally, I would be just so sad if it was ever destroyed. That's why my whole body, mind, and passion are into this. But I'm not alone, and I just want to acknowledge that that the mayor, the local councillor, Councillor Asma Malik, Councillor Fletcher, and many others across the city feel the same way. And there are many of us who are going to work as a team to paraphrase Doug Ford, to protect Toronto. We're going to do that.
Well, we're very grateful for that, Josh. And I'm sure you have these conversations at City Hall. Right now, it's obvious that the major critical impacts happen in the immediate central waterfront, but there will be impacts of jet traffic, across the entire waterfront from Etobicoke Creek to, to
Absolutely.
Rouge, depending on flight paths. Because of course, if you are as I am, I live on top of the Scarborough Bluffs. I'm in Scarborough Southwest.
Yeah.
The jets I see are, 20,000 feet up because they're circling to land northwest of me at Pearson.
Mhm.
But we do see Porter flights coming in, and you can sometimes even hear them. They're moderately high up, if you're at Birchmount Road, they're still moderately high up.
Mhm.
But yeah, the jet traffic will impact the entire, the
Edward,
entire
there's
area.
a by-election coming up in Scarborough Southwest.
I've heard a rumor about it.
And
I've
you're
heard
absolutely right.
rumors.
You're absolutely right. This is not, a lot. Some people like characterizing every debate as sort of a downtown versus suburb kind of fight, or left wing versus right wing. Our waterfront, our whole lakeshore belongs to all of us, and it's there to increase our quality of life and our livability and our opportunities, economic development, housing, pleasure, recreation. It's a beautiful part of our life. We're so lucky to live along a lake. Not every city can boast about that. So you're right. Whether you live in Scarborough, Etobicoke, downtown, or if you live in North York and you also value the fact that you have a lake to go to, it's something worth fighting for together.
Right. Well, thank you so much. And
Thank
I
you.
do really wish these things weren't as oddly left-coded and right-coded in Toronto, because I mean, I think of like, Red Ken Livingston and Boris Johnson, two very different mayors of London, and yet strangely on things like bike lane policies and congestion charges, they had the same policy.
I mean, we're veering off into sort of a TED talk about the condition of politics these days, but I can just answer very quickly. I think a lot of these debates are artificially created into these sort of ideological or right or left or whatever. There's good public policy, right? There's coexisting truths, but there aren't alternative facts, and there we can have debates over different issues, but we should be looking at actually what works. And you know, whether you like the idea of jets on the island or not, the facts remain that Doug Ford has not put forward a plan to actually argue his case. And that's not how you create public policy. And it's absolutely reasonable to push back and go, we'll go through a thoughtful process to consider whatever you want to say. But you don't get just to make an announcement, shove Toronto out of the picture, steal other people's lands, and say, I'm going to do something. Like you wouldn't do that for anything. And frankly, if a progressive premier did that, I would expect Doug Ford to stand up and say that's crazy, right? So
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, thank you. Great.
thank you,
Appreciate it immensely.
thank you.
And thank you. Yes, the handsome lad who just jumped in there, for those of you who don't know, is our esteemed chair of Waterfront for All, Ed Hoare. Wave, Ed. And he'll be popping in again, no doubt, and we're grateful for that. I'd like to also shout out to Ron Jenkins, who's also on our speaker series committee, who's with us this evening, and I think maybe having a word or two as we jump in again for a bit of an impromptu panel after our next speaker. So I am going to move on to introduce our next speaker. Mark Wilson. Now, many of you may know that Mark was at one time a chair of Waterfront Toronto, uh, and did an excellent job as chair of the board there. And we're pleased to have him with us. So over to you, sir.
Is that visible?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Yeah. So I've been giving some thought to not necessarily the consequences, but what are the motivations? Why has this suddenly emerged as a topic that Doug Ford is championing, that suddenly the Board of Trade is championing? Where does this come from? Why are we having this now? And I have a hypothesis that says, regardless of what the supposed benefits that are being touted without any evidence whatsoever, I think this is a rescue mission. I think we have a failing airport, and that's going to be gutted by the Alto high-speed rail project. And this is a rescue mission from the investors in the airport terminals, Nieuport Aviation. And I think once we get our heads around that, I think that will also help us with our strategy. So let me take you through some analysis that I've done to attempt to quantify what this actually means. And first of all, I want to thank Ron Jenkins for a set of charts that he presented at the last session of Waterfront for All. And they're very important because they lay out what's actually happening in the airport. And this was what was proposed and viewed as what the base case for the airport was. And so way back, we had 2.43 million people, and we had a view that that would continue to grow. And with jets, it would just take off. What actually happened? Well, it did follow that line for a little while, and then this little thing called COVID happened. And of course, it just catastrophically dropped. But the news is it has not recovered to its previous heights. And in fact, the curve is bending downwards as of last year. So we're actually at a level which is way back to 2011 in terms of what's happening to the airport, the actual traffic at Billy Bishop. And so, what's all that about? Well, there's a few things that have happened. First of all, Porter Airlines has gone to Pearson, and I think they may be even the second or third largest carrier after Air Canada out of Pearson. And they started in 2023, and their flights from Billy Bishop have in fact dropped quite dramatically because they're flying to all destinations from Pearson. In order to try and counter this and put some growth back in, pre-clearance to the US at Billy Bishop just started this year, March 10th, 2026. And Air Canada added some new destinations as a result of that. So that's an attempt to juice and grow that, in fact, declining usage that's happening at Billy Bishop. I think the other thing to understand is that Billy Bishop, as a regional airport, really services primarily Ottawa and Montreal. And I asked Gemini AI to do a little analysis for me, and this is what it produced. And it said basically 55 to 60% of the airport's total daily commercial scheduled operations are Montreal, Ottawa, Toronto. So just let that sink in for a minute. This is an airport that's primarily servicing the commute to Ottawa and the commute to Montreal from Toronto. That's basically the core of this airport. And what's happening to that, in fact, transportation in that corridor? Well, we have the Alto high-speed rail network, which is pressing ahead. It's difficult to avoid their advertisements, whether they're on paper or digital. And this is a huge, big project that's going to connect Toronto, Peterborough, Ottawa, Montreal, Laval, Trois-Rivières, and Quebec. And this is a project that's going ahead. The contract with, in fact, the consortium that's going to build was signed in March 2025, and the first construction segment is going to expected to commence 29 to 30, which is actually within the term of the current federal government. And off the Alto website, these are the high-speed rail travel times that they're suggesting at the moment. 2 hours Toronto, Ottawa, 3 hours Toronto, Montreal, 1 hour Ottawa, Montreal, an hour and a half Montreal to Quebec City. And that's at around the current technology of 300, 320 kilometers an hour that high-speed rail tends to travel. But there are, we'll see by the time this actually goes up, that technology continues to evolve. And if anything, those times will shrink. They won't get longer as the technology for high-speed rail evolves. And I think importantly, Josh talked a lot about the engagement of the federal government. This particular project is a big priority of the federal government. And it's a priority of the Prime Minister himself. It's a cornerstone of his national economic agenda. He's been challenged because there's been some questions about, particularly in the rural areas, about displacement, expropriation, the kinds of things that you get with a major new transportation corridor. And he's defended the project. He's defended strongly the project to the extent that there's $3 billion allocated in the 2025 budget to support the project. So there's real cash behind this. It's not just a pipe dream. And to further enhance that, it has been assigned as a transformative project to the Major Project Office. And you'll notice the date on that, September 11th, 2025. So, you get that trigger, and what happens if you're in fact sitting in Billy Bishop Airport looking at the fact there's going to be high-speed rail that's going to take on your market? So this is some work that also we can draw on, which is what happens when to air traffic when in fact you get high-speed rail. And these are 3 different case studies out of Europe: Paris-Lyon, Madrid-Barcelona, Rome-Naples, all at different durations. So Paris-Lyon takes about 2 hours, Madrid-Barcelona takes about 3 hours, Rome-Naples is an hour. And if you look at it, Within a year of the Paris-Lyon operating, domestic airline traffic dropped by 60%. And Madrid-Barcelona, before the high-speed line opened, it was the world's busiest passenger route, 971 scheduled flights per week. By 2017, 63% of that was on high-speed rail. And if you look at the even shorter duration Rome-Naples, it's gone. There's no airline traffic whatsoever happening in Rome-Naples. So this experience says that as I said at the heading, when the train journey time equals air journey time, rail takes it all over. And if it's 1 to 2 hours, you still got 50% market share. So I think this is really the existential question that Billy Bishop Airport and in particular Nieuport Aviation are trying to deal with. So if you take those numbers from the Europe experience and you take the 60% loss against the numbers that there are today, there's at least a one-third reduction that'll happen in flights at Billy Bishop Airport. At least one-third. And all of this is my amateur work. As Ed has said, we need some real experts to look at these things. But I think directionally this is right. It's at least a third, could easily be 40% or more that in fact reduces the flights at Billy Bishop Airport. So that's in fact what Nieuport Aviation and Billy Bishop are dealing with. So what we have is, and if you're not familiar with Nieuport Aviation, they're the people who actually bought the terminal from Porter Airlines a decade or so ago. And they paid substantial money for it, and there's been some reorganizations of the ownership since then. But basically, they're the ones who've been driving the lobbying. Matt Elliott did an interesting analysis today of their lobbying efforts at the federal government, which in fact commenced, guess what? Back in November of 2025, right after this major project was assigned as a transformation project to the Major Projects Office. So it's really a rescue mission for Nieuport Aviation's investment in the terminal. That's how I would view this. And as Josh has pointed out, it really is the federal government that has the ability to shut this down, either through Transport Canada and its application diligently of its own regulations, or in fact its view around housing or its view around quality of life or many of the other issues that are there. So I think to emphasize again, that is where we need to focus our efforts, is in fact raising our voices to the federal government MPs, to in fact the ministers in Ottawa, and letting them know our concerns about this particular venture. I think it's not out of the question to basically say if this decision goes down as a positive in terms of expanding the airport, there will be electoral consequences in downtown Toronto for the Liberal Party. Um, you know, the polls basically are interesting. If you look at the downtown area, you get a very strong negative reaction to the airport. The farther away you get from downtown, the more that people, sort of like that initial dream that Councillor Matlow talked about until they get better information. But I think there could be very, very real electoral consequences. Already, the new NDP leader has said that his mission is to revive the NDP in downtown Toronto. And I think we may see, we've already seen the provincial NDP come out very strongly against what's happening at the airport. So I think it's not out of the question to basically raise the electoral consequences with the federal Liberals. Anyway, that's my very short analysis of what I think is motivating it and what we should do about it.
Thank you very much, Mark. Um, if you, there we are. Thank you. So,
Can I jump in again?
yeah, you want to jump in and I'll just pin you to our screen and appreciate that, Ed. And Ron, did you want to jump in for a sec? Oh, just raise your hand if you do. Go ahead, Ed.
I just thought I'd say, that's great. That's a great analysis, Mark. Thank you so much. The other thing I have heard, and the other danger that I think the airport faces, is that Porter actually leaves as a tenant. So then the principal tenant no longer there. So I think Porter has done quite a smart thing since 2022, which is that there had been litigation, as you know, between them and Nieuport and so on, and had to do really with who pays, who takes the risk for the drop in traffic during the COVID epidemic. But they said, well, it costs us 3 times as much to operate here, and we're probably going to leave because our gate fees are too high. And then they didn't sort of do it. Presumably they negotiated down a little bit or something. We know this from some public letters that came out of their litigation. But what's interesting is they put their money where their mouth is, and they started buying jets, Embraers starting about 2022. And now their fleet, I don't have the exact numbers with me, but it's something approaching 2/3, I think, of their fleet is now jets, which they seem to be enjoying good success, flying out of Pearson, as you mentioned. They also started recently flying out of Hamilton, and I think they've been expanding in Hamilton. They've reduced their routes. There's at least one route, I think Sudbury to Toronto, where they said, well, we're just not going to fly that one anymore. We'll fly it to Ottawa. So they're kind of not, and if we were to ask them, I don't know what they would say. But I think it would be fair to say that their emphasis is clearly on Pearson, and they've discovered they can make money there. And maybe, we don't know, they can make more money there than they can at Billy Bishop. So that, and also they've got this somewhat aging fleet. And those could be, they don't seem to be replacing them. They say, well, they're not made anymore. Well, they probably could be made if there was a demand for them. You make a big order for, 50 of them. I'm sure they'd be happy to, get the assembly lines up and running for that. But they don't obviously want to do that. So it would appear that the writing is on the wall. Their largest, by far, tenant might leave, or is at least diminishing its operations there. So in addition to the drop in traffic that you've so clearly shown us, there's that problem kind of hanging over them. And I think that might be another aspect of what is happening. And do you have any comment on that? Or if you heard anything, you know way more people than I do, you hear way more things. Do you have any sense of that at all?
Do you mean me?
Yes,
Yes, you, Mr. Wilson. We mean
No,
you.
I don't have any sense of that other than, the only comment I would make is there are other turboprop manufacturers in the world.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to continue it, you don't have to continue it with the same planes. You could continue to have the airport. Somebody just put in the chat. There's a ATR 72600. Turboprops are manufactured elsewhere, so
Yeah.
so you could continue service at a reduced scale with turboprops out of the island airport, sort of in the manner of this cozy regional airport that Josh described. But in terms of Porter's intentions, I really don't know. The only thing I've seen is the lobbying that Newport's doing extensively at the federal and also at the city level, obviously. But that started late last winter, right after the Alto project got declared as a major transformation project.
Right. One of the odd ironies, given the Ontario leader of the opposition, Merritt Stiles, stated positions on this issue. One of the odd ironies, and I suppose this is the thing about lobbying, is that Kim Wright is leading the charge for Newport, and Kim Wright is a well-established New Democrat who's very close to the leader of the opposition and her team. Just ironically, in this case, she is leading the charge for Newport on jet expansion at Billy Bishop, and it is a matter of public record. I am not speaking out of turn. You can look it up, as they say. There's definitely a strong effort, and I know Norm. Norm, you're here, aren't you? Somewhere, Norm. Norm's here from No Jets. Norm, shout out to Norm. Hi, Norm. I'm gonna turn on your screen, man. I'm gonna add you. Do you want to say hi? You're clapping. That's cool. Well, let's see if Norm wants to say hi and turn on his mic and his screen. But I'm just giving you I'm giving your black square with your name a place of honor. So just so some people know, many of the folks who went on to form Waterfront for All, Ed Hoare, Ron Jenkins, and Jim Panou, who we're going to hear from in a few minutes, were part of the successful campaign to oppose jets almost 10, 12 years ago when that victory was won. And Norm was part of that. And Norm has revived No Jets Toronto, as you know, and has been really leading efforts on that side. Our you would say our cousins or our siblings. And we all hope that we're successful and that Norm can once again put No Jets into TO into a well-deserved retirement. But yeah, so please check out there. I'm sure some of you have already engaged with No Jets. We welcome your focus on that. And oh, something just happened. We lost a couple of people. Um, so I think, Mark, what would your best advice be to people in terms of engaging as citizens on this issue?
Well, the first thing they need to do, particularly if they live in the 416 area and have a Liberal MP, is write to them and express their concerns. So that's kind of step one. I think what we haven't yet done as a collective, or whether that's No Jets or Waterfront for All or councillors like Josh Matlow or others, is really organized a process and a set of events that people can participate in. And I think that's the next step that we owe the 300 people who have joined this session. This is clearly something that people are very passionate about, and we need to create something that they can participate in. There are numerous petitions as well that have been raised by councillors and by others that people can sign on to. So all of that should happen as well. But I think we need to organize a process that people can engage in and express their will. Kind of like the No Kings celebrations in some ways. The No Jets celebrations need to start to happen.
Excellent. Okay, great. Thanks so much for that. Ron, did you have any comment at this time?
Not at this time. I'd like to see Nor or Jim's fly-throughs, though. I'm
Gr-
waiting for those.
You're waiting for that. I think I feel like I'm waiting for those as well. So let's just go to that, and I will get that introduce Jim. So Jim Panou was part of the original No Jets, successful No Jets campaign. He's a Waterfront for All and No Jets veteran, and we're pleased to have Jim with us this evening. Jim, I'm just going to put you in a spotlight there.
Thank you.
And please tell us about what you're going to show us and show it to us.
Okay, let me just start with sharing my Google Earth Pro window. Just let me know if that comes up on your screen. Is it there?
Yes, it is.
So back in 2013, when we were fighting the battle against Porter plans, we thought, what should we do to kind of learn about airports? And worked with Transport Action Ontario, and we basically built an airport, meaning that we built all the airspace that's associated with the airport. First thing that we learn is what regulates the airport and what are the implications in terms of airspace. Back in 1983, the Toronto Island zoning regulations were created, after an aeronautical survey by Transport Canada. So what you're looking at over there on the, fanning away from the center of the airport to the east and to the west are known as obstacle limitation surfaces. So the blue one over here and the one going that way. The one heading east basically starts at the airport and fans out, climbing at a rate of 1 to 20. So for every 1 foot, sorry, for every 20 feet out, 1 foot up. So that's considered a very steep slope on airports. The opposite side is, I believe, a 1 to 50. And if you look over there, it's basically goes above the Hearn stack. It was the Hearn stack that dictated that that one had to be high. So that airspace has to be clear for airplanes to be able to land. No buildings are allowed to penetrate into that space. And that has pretty much held until today. The Toronto Island zoning regulations still dictate the heights of buildings. Now, if we're to put jets in there, that's going to change. It's going to change really significantly. With jets, that may seem like a smaller, smaller distance that it's covering, but the angles are really quite steep. Sorry, quite shallow. Now, if you notice at the far end, the Hearn stack goes right past it. So if jets are allowed, Transport Canada will reevaluate this airspace under the Transport Canada standards known as TP 312 Edition 5. So you can see it's significantly lower. I'm just going to turn the other one on just so you can kind of compare the differences. You can see that red area is quite a bit lower. So what does that mean for the portlands? Now this the Okaminen. I'm sorry. Can somebody pronounce it for me? I haven't committed that to memory yet.
Ukweminimising.
Yeah. So that particular precinct, City of Toronto planning, they basically have established the heights of buildings that can be there. These are not where what's going to be there right now. What I've mapped out is the maximum height allowed into that area, and the relationship with the obstacle limitation surface. So in this area, it does not seem to affect it, and it's all based on where the runway is placed. So we've placed the runway where we think it should be. We'll come to that a little bit later. But I've also put these hypothetical buildings. I found some models of buildings that are, I believe, 40 stories, and just placed them at various spots in the Polson area. And anything above the red is not going to be allowed. The buildings will have to be substantially lower than they are right now. But you can see where the planes are coming in, lining up for a landing. They're awfully close to those buildings. Is that a good idea? It may be, it may be allowable, but is it a good idea? Now the planes here are landing, entering the 3-degree slope, which is what airplanes like to land on. The higher one is 4.8, which is what it used to be in the past. That changed since the last battle that we have. So that's lowered from up there down to a much lower one. If we look at the runway configuration, I'm just going to turn off this top layer. Now the runway has been built to the information that we've managed to get from the Port Authority in the Globe article and the Star article, the length about 900 feet. So these were built to that width. They're built to the Transport Canada specifications, meaning that you need a parallel taxiway. There has to be a certain amount of separation, 122 meters from the center to here. So this is what we anticipate that it's going to look like. They say that it's not going to have much of an effect on the eastern part. Let me just turn that on and off. So we're going to go from there to there. We've added the RISA area, the 150 meters that is going to be at either end. And then we believe that there's going to be runway approach lights. I believe it was mentioned in the Oliver Wayman report that that we will need them. Looking at all the airports across the country, the major airports, Billy Bishop is the only one that does not have runway approach lights. And they basically make it a lot safer for landing during foggy weather. It allows them to confirm that they are on the right path heading into the runway. Now that move out to the west is really going to be significant in terms of closing that western gap substantially. There's implications to that which Ron, I think, might be able to speak to. The Empire Sandy going through there will be awfully close to the protective airspace. Now there's talk of jet blast barriers. So in red, you can see the jet blast barrier. There's also a noise barrier, which we can see in the yellow. So those are done to the sizes that were in the EA that was made in 2017 that we got our hands on recently. So that's basically going to be a substantial wall that's going to block that off. If you're going to Coronation Park or Trillium Park, the view is not going to be that wonderful. Likewise on the island side. So it's not a small airport anymore. It becomes a really dominant part of both the harbor and the west. Now this is a race also. If the portlands, the Polson area, if buildings started going up right now to the allowable height with the previous zoning regulations, they would have primacy. But if jets are allowed, Transport Canada reevaluates this airspace. All of a sudden, the island has, the airport has primacy over any development over here. So it's rather existential.
So, Jim, I know that recently, Jason Thorne, the chief planner for Toronto, noted that the zoning and height limitations that have been set, while there are no, specific development proposals for Oakland because they're still working on the public realm and the sewers and all that work and the park build out as well. He noted that the current plans for Oakland and Menacing are completely viable with current Billy Bishop Airport operations.
Yes, let me.
But
let me just bring
he
that up.
offered no view on what what impact jets might have simply because, of course, a familiar refrain, there is no concrete proposal, as you noted.
Yeah. So if everything stays the same, if the Toronto Island zoning regulations are in place, so you're basically looking at that. That's completely missing that area. Plus, it's a much higher slope, so the protective surface. And even those 41-story buildings, they can actually go taller. But as soon as you apply the new standards under TP 312 version 5, they're grabbing all that airspace basically above that becomes the airports all through this area, anywhere that you see in red. Even land that Ports Toronto owns that potentially could be a development down the road, that's going to be affected. But again, the question I still have to ask, even though you can over here, is it a good idea?
Jim, there's something called a one engine inoperative scenario.
Yeah, that one.
What that is that something you've modeled or not? That's something
Well,
in addition to this, right?
yeah, I have it. I haven't touched it in a dozen years. Let's
Yeah.
assume that an airplane takes off. I just want to turn off the glide slopes.
So,
So if the
my,
air, one more.
so my understanding would be that if in the new regulations, the fifth edition, you have a requirement that a plane that loses an engine on takeoff and therefore can't climb as fast and is perhaps less controllable won't hit anything. So that's a kind of an additional requirement is you got to have an open space
Yeah,
at a
basically,
kind of lower level to accommodate that. If I got that right?
yeah, you have to basically have an exit out. So they actually have a procedure if they take off and then all of a sudden they lose one engine. Again, planes are heading in the wrong direction here for this, but let's assume that it takes off. While the wheels are still down and the airplane hasn't established, hasn't climbed, they're gonna, their intent is to basically turn south. But if you've got lost control, uh, they can't climb that quickly just because you can climb a certain rate with two engines. One engine isn't just going to be half that; it's substantially lower than that. And what you're going to have basically is you're going to have buildings in there that are going to be very much in the way of a one engine climb.
So something's got to give there, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. Ron and I have started discussing over the weekend just the amount of movement of water in and out of the of the harbor, of the inner harbor. Ron, did you want to touch on any of that while
Yeah,
I can
yeah,
fly you
sure.
around?
I hope you can hear me. This view is actually a good view to start with. Looking at the Western Gap and the intrusion of the runway fill into that Western Gap. The thing that is new to me and probably new to most people is that the inner harbor of Toronto is not actually fed very much at all by the Don River. It's fed almost entirely by water flow through the Western Gap into the inner harbor. And the other sources of inflow into the inner harbor are the Don River and sewers. And those are both sources of pollution. The environmental assessment that we have recently got hold of that looks at the Porter proposal, a 200-meter extension at the west end, that 200-meter extension would cut the yeah, you may be able to show it. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't have it handy, but
Okay,
the
so never
original
mind that.
extension, it would have
But
been
without
around here.
okay, this is the current airport. And if you put the proposed extension for Porter 200 meters, it would reduce the cross-sectional entrance way through the Western Gap by 50%. And that would leave the inner harbor with very stagnant water. The water in the inner harbor now all exits through the Eastern Gap, and its turnover in the harbor is 6.7 days. But if you were to build the Porter proposal of 200 meters, that residence of water would then increase to 12.3 days, which is effectively doubling how long water sits in the inner harbor. What the terminology is flushing. And, I think most of us make a point of flushing after we've used our toilets. But what we have here is Doug Ford kind of breaking into the house and wrecking our plumbing. So so the harbor would not flush effectively at all. We're looking at instead of 200 meters, we're looking at 900 meters. So that really makes a huge difference to how much water can move through the inner harbor in a given period of time. Obviously, if you get the period of time between harbor flushings being longer than the time period between heavy storms, then it doesn't flush before the next surge of polluted water comes through the storm sewers and the combined sewers and the Don River. So the inner harbor would become progressively more polluted, not having its natural mechanism for hydraulic change. And if I can grab the screen for just a second on the screen sharing.
So sorry, okay, let me stop.
Yeah, you'll just have to stop for a moment for me to come in. Where's my screen sharing? Here it is. What I'd like to show people is just the portion of this environmental assessment that relates to what I'm talking about. It's the summary to Appendix C6. And I'll read from about here. Hydraulic residence time is the time required to replace or flush the total volume of water in the harbor and is used as an indicator of water quality. The proposed West End extension, runway 08, that is the harbor taking off or landing from the west, will reduce the cross-sectional flow area and average inflow through the Western Gap by approximately 50%. Now, remember, we're talking about the 200-meter expansion, and will double the average residence time of water in the inner harbor from 6.7 to 12.3 days. Sources of pollution in the inner harbor include Don River discharges, storm sewer outfalls, and combined sewer overflows. The expected increase in residence time has a high potential of intensifying water quality problems in the inner harbor through reduced dilution and flushing of these pollutants from the harbor. So the East End extension also has a problem in terms of circulation in the harbor, but it's not as significant, I think, as the West. But what this really says is the Porter proposal, the 200 meters at the West End, was bad for water quality in the inner harbor. And we can easily infer that if you extend that 200 meters 4 times or 4.5 times farther, you're going to have even less water transiting through the Western Gap, even less turnover in the inner harbor. And it's, I think, a serious environmental problem. That was kind of what I wanted to get across. I can end my screen sharing.
Thank you. Thank you, Ron.
I just thought I'd jump in and say that
Please jump in. Let me pin you so we can see you. There you are. Hi.
here I am. Hello.
Yeah, Ed is known to jump in, but not into the harbor these days, maybe, right?
Well, actually, there
I
are
roll my
friends of ours
kayak,
who do.
but
Yes, but you don't
oh,
swim like our friend Steve Mann does.
I tend to do it over towards the outside. But once the jets are there, I guess I won't be doing that anymore. But anyway, there are all of that should be kept in mind with the fact that there's been enormous investment in trying to clean up the harbor. We've got the wet weather flow master plan project that we've talked about in past Waterfront for All events. This is a massive sewer project that attempts to reduce discharge and CSOs into the harbor and so on. And the budget, I believe, as far as I know, it's around 4.3 billion for that.
Right. And I think the initial piece we had, Lou Geronimo had
We had a great talk, and we'd like to get him back. I think talk about that as this ongoing thing that's taking 30 years or something, kind of slowly grinds along, and it's really in a lot of ways one of the most important programs. It's a little bit below the radar because it's not a beautiful park or trees or anything, and sewers are not that glamorous, but it's an enormously important, enormously expensive thing that is being done. There's also a Toronto and Region remedial action plan to improve water quality. So we have invested a lot, and will continue to do so, into water quality in our harbor and around the island and the Toronto waterfront in general. So obviously there should be very careful scrutiny on what the effect on all of those very expensive investments would be if this proposal were to go forward.
If I may, in the background, and we haven't, I warn you all that we haven't really had time to pass it around for what you might call our own version of peer review and input and editing, but we're working on a draft, very rough draft, admittedly, report at the moment on looking at the economic cost benefits of like the continued revitalization of the portlands, of our waterfront, its economic impact vis-a-vis, oddly, a 10 million passenger a year jet airport. And I've shared it in the chat, but let me just read one little paragraph from the jet from it. Using a cost-benefit lens that incorporates peer-reviewed parameters for noise, health, climate, and ecosystem service valuation, the evidence indicates that a full build-out of the portlands and adjacent revitalization areas, paired with protection and enhancement of Toronto Island Park, delivers more durable and diversified economic value than converting YTZ into a 10 million passenger jet airport. There. So we look forward to sharing that report when we've had more chance to flesh it out, edit it, and maybe put some pretty graphics in it. That's something we intend to release in the not so very distant future. And also we will also, of course, share that with our dear friends at No Jets TO. Unfortunately, Norm, who is leading the charge at what I call No Jets TO 2.0, is preoccupied with life at the moment. So I think he's listening to us, but he's unable to talk to us at the moment. But we just know he's there in the background, and we cheer him on and encourage you to follow them and support them as well. Jim, did you have anything else you wanted to say or add?
Not right now. There's a lot of this is like really the minutia that I think will probably take a written report the way we did with transport action back in the past, but an updated version where we dig a lot deeper into it. So yeah.
I have a question, I guess, for Mark. Is that are you on top of the facts in terms of the Pearson expansion that I understand is breaking ground next week or something? It's
No,
a very
no. I mean, I just know what's on their website,
Okay.
and they're going in multiple phases, and yeah, the first phase is moving ahead quickly. Yeah.
Right. So at any rate, I guess
But their plan, I think, is to add capacity for another 20 million.
I think it's in that area or even
Yeah.
higher.
Yeah.
So in other words, the federal government in its infinite wisdom has decided that may be the best place for aviation dollars to be spent. One of the things that we've discussed on past our last session was that the costs of the Billabis expansion, according to the Air Canada consultants we talked about last time, were estimated 10 years ago at $1 billion. And that seems probably conservative because it doesn't include any of the ground side, the city side improvements in transit and everything else that would be required. So it's in addition to being somewhat intrusive, the costs are clearly very high. Maybe we'll get some information out of Toronto Port Authority one of these days as to the details and as to how much it will cost, and we'll look forward to that. But it does seem fair to say that even if you put it in, the number of people that it might benefit would be perhaps pretty small, particularly if Porter leaves or people start taking the high-speed train. There may be a lot of better uses for those billions than expanding down there at Ontario Place or near Ontario Place.
And
I would think.
to add to support what you're saying too, and we've mentioned this before, but I think it's worth continuing to mention it and mention it again and again. We are building, the extension of the Crosstown West, which will connect to Renforth Drive, and then go from there to the airport. Mississauga is building out a rapid transit busway that will lead to Pearson, among other destinations. And that busway is being built so it can be upgraded to light metro or LRT, at some point. And as part of their long-term plans, the Pearson is also pitching a multimodal transit hub, a sort of Union Station Northwest. And at some point, Up Express is supposed to be electrified. So these are all things that are in the works in various stages of, some are funded, some are planned, some are actually under construction, in the case of the Crosstown and the Mississauga busway. So, if you think of the roughly 7.5 million people in the GTA and the almost 10 million people in the Golden Horseshoe, you have, as has been noted already, and Mark noticed that, Pearson is a lot more closer to most of those people, and Hamilton Airport is also there, just waiting for an upgrade and a GO train spur line or a light metro spur line. So again, none of that's free, but it's there, and the infrastructure's there. And it doesn't, and I also point to people who will say things like, London City Airport. Well, London City Airport, which, by the way, is not universally loved, and there have been campaigns in London to consider closing it down or phasing it out. But London City Airport is 11 kilometers from the City of London, from the financial center of London, right? Which is like, I'm 11 kilometers right now from, Yonge Street, where I'm speaking to you from, at the top of the Scarborough Bluffs at Birch Mountain and Kingston Road. So, Midway is like Downsview, right? Midway Chicago is like Downsview. Same with Orly, it's even slightly farther. And of course, Newark and LaGuardia, depending on where you are in Manhattan, are somewhere between 15 to 25 kilometers from, Wall Street. So even cities that have what people consider to be, say, inner city or urban airports, they aren't right in front of us. And Chicago, a city that our premier has often said he loves and admires, of course, famously closed its waterfront airport and turned the massive parking lot that used to exist just west of Michigan Avenue into Millennium Park. So
we've got, did I hear that Ken Greenberg was here? I haven't heard from Ken in a long time. I'm just wondering if Ken.
I don't think
I haven't
Ken,
heard
no,
on
he's,
this.
no, Ken's not in the room.
Okay, Paul. How about Paul Bedford? He's, I think.
Paul Bedford. Paul.
Oh,
Hi,
are you here?
Paul. Do you want to unmute yourself?
Oh,
I think you should be. There you go.
There you go. Hi.
there,
Hi,
he's
Paul.
always an interesting guy to hear from.
Yeah, no,
Hi, Paul. How are you?
a great session with Josh and Mark and all you guys. I congratulate you. And I guess the only thing I'd add, this is a long, long process, and we're building and collecting a lot of valuable information. And I think Ken can speak for himself, but Ken, myself, Ann Golden, and a few other people are putting together something that I think is really important. I think we're going to call it a reality check. And we're really going to ask a lot of questions. And we're working on that now. It'll probably be, available in the coming weeks, and we'll put it out to everybody. And we'll basically ask all of the kinds of questions that many of we've already heard so far, and others we haven't heard. And one of the things I think, in addition to, that the waterfront is really for everybody and the airport should never dominate it, and what all the things we've accomplished with Waterfront Toronto, environment, health, landside, waterside, all these kinds of things. I think one of the things that's really important, I think, Ed, you've referred to it, is there doesn't appear to be a business case at all to do this. And we're going to ask a lot of those questions. You made reference to the report that was done, what, 10 years ago or so, that estimated roughly $1 billion would be the cost of actually equipping an airport to accommodate this increased passenger volume. And that may be true, it may be more than that. But when you start to think about it, if you're going to attempt to accommodate so many more passengers, you need a much bigger terminal. You need a lot more gates. You need a lot more space to park the planes because the land area that is there now is far too small to achieve that. And then, as you rightly said, all the landside improvements would be needed in terms of, the transportation considerations, both for parking, for transit, the great unknown question about Little Norway Park. We've heard that it won't be touched, and then we've heard that a third of it will be gone, and then who knows what else. So all those kinds of questions need answers, and we want to make sure that we push the case and make sure we get all those. I guess the only last thing I'll say is the map that was released as part of the legislation that showed the entire islands, shown on a map for potential acquisition or expropriation, obviously has expressed enormous concern among not only the residents of the city who use the islands, but the people who live there and all of the boating community. There are an awful lot of people who use the islands, throughout the entire summer months, and it's a unique asset that obviously nobody wants to lose. So there's a million questions, and we're going to try and group them into everyday language and logical, documentation, and get it out there, and we'll add it to the mix. So I guess that's where we are right now, and I think the point can't be emphasized enough that the federal MPs are key to this. And so I've certainly contacted my new MP, Daniel Martin, and be seeing her next week. And everyone else needs to contact their MP, because with the leader of the opposition, Pierre Poilievre, coming out strongly in favor of the airport, I think the Liberals really need to think very, very hard about the process they're going to enter into and what the ultimate decision will be. So I could go on and on, but that's sort of where we are, and it'll be in addition to everything else that people have already done.
Well, and Paul, I think you've hinted at it, and is that the feds, to their credit, have put billions into the Portland's waterfront transit, and they are trying to spend billions on housing, which of course has an ideal location in the Portland. So it would seem to me there may be merit in posing to our federal friends that that Jetsat Billy Bishop is a counter to that and puts at risk the investments they have made and are making.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, again, if you look at our waterfront, it is a wonderful collection of a variety of diverse uses and activities, and it's not dominated by any one of them. If this airport were to grow to the extent that it's proposed, it would become the dominant use, and it would totally, I'll almost quote what the environmental assessment said. One of the greatest findings I found was significant from that EA of 2017 is that it would totally change the look and feel of the entire waterfront. That's almost a quote from the EA that was done in 2017.
And I'm just posting, I've posted it before, but I'm posting a link to that EA again. So people can have that. And we have, so yeah. All right. Well, thank you,
Great.
Paul.
Okay.
Appreciate that.
Keep up the good work, and we'll all of us will continue to do our respective thing and keep at it.
Well, great. Thank you. Tony, did you have a question? You have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, well, yeah. Can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah. There's so many questions. I'll just be brief because I know there's a lot of people, but just we've always wanted to know whether the airport was viable. And I know Brian, like he's also on the line. He's been very much involved, Brian Eiler, and that's been very difficult to ascertain. But are not this discussions more or less in the proponents sort of demonstrating that the airport is not viable? So that for those people that are saying that they would rather have a small regional airport, it does seem that this is proof that it's not viable and they can't. And so are we at a one of those points where it's either close the airport or expand, like that they're in their death throes, like the airport's finished? Is that not this is how I'm reading what's going on. It's much like if you're looking at the numbers, the decline. I mean, a business that's not growing, it's declining. They've raised the rates. The Newfield Porter partly left because they were getting cheap rates before, and then they sold the terminal and had to pay fees like 3 times as high. So do we know? It just seems to me that there isn't an option for it to stay as a small regional. That it really is not. It's broke, and I think we've been struggling for a long time to really understand its finances. That's one question because it has an impact, right? Like it seems to me that maybe I'm wrong, but maybe we can. If somebody have we learned any more? And a big worry also is if Ford loses the battle about the airport, but he seizes the land, can he not do other things with it? So is this could be a backup strategy where Newfield gets bailed out because the government will pay them out. So one way or another, it may not just be a battle over the airport, but the battle over the province taking control of all of that area. Maybe I'm wrong, but Ford's always connected to developers, and it's so.
Tony, just remember the feds control 80% of it, more or less.
Of the airport lands, but not the island as a whole.
Yeah.
I think Tony, are you trying to tell us you don't want a retirement job as a croupier at the Toronto Island Casino? Is that what you're saying?
No, thanks. And the last thing, just related to economics, when Bedford was making some good points, can we look at the economic loss of an airport expansion? Because I don't know whether we can fight numbers with numbers, but the island is one of the number one draws as a tourist draw.
1.5 million.
It will decline. The whole business will decline. So, is there some way to, looking into questions, to demonstrate the economic loss that an expansion? I mean, there's the loss of we're talking about losing affordable housing, but there'll be other economic losses, and maybe I don't know. Numbers seem to matter. Anyway, I don't want to tie up too much time. There's so many issues.
No, it's good. Thank you, Tony, and thanks for your patience and waiting. Brian, I've pinned you. I believe you're unmuted. Speak to me, Brian. There you are.
I am. I'm going to jump in and say that, Tony, your question and your observation is absolutely right. Mark is absolutely right. Newport is in serious financial trouble. They borrowed $650 million from the Bank of Nova Scotia. There's a mortgage against the terminal. With Porter declining in terms of its business at the island airport and moving a lot of it to Pearson, Newport's revenue is shrinking desperately. And they are, as Mark noted, they are lobbying at the provincial level. They're lobbying federally. They're desperate to find a solution. And their solution is jets. We know that. And we know the island airport is not going to survive if it doesn't get jets. It will be gone as Porter abandons it and as Newport finally throws in the towel and says this isn't viable. So that's the first point I wanted to make. And the second point is that when you look at their claimed economic benefits and the studies they use to support that jets will provide economic benefit, none of the studies look at the alternative. What if the business from the island airport moves to Pearson? And I think the answer is clear that there's no net economic benefit from having the island airport in existence, that business, the economic benefit that the island airport provides all goes to Pearson, and our economy stays as solid as it is. So those are the 2 points I thought I would make tonight.
If I could just add to that, some of that business will go to Alto, not to Pearson.
Exactly.
And if you want to look for an airline that maybe has some foresight, Air Canada is part of the consortium that's building Alto, which is kind of an interesting play on their part.
And they have expressed, there now it wasn't a big formal statement, but there has been, apparently, as far as I understand, an expression from Air Canada that they're not too thrilled about this idea. And they weren't thrilled about it, hence their commission of the Oliver Wyman study, which we shared earlier in the chat. They weren't too thrilled about it, a decade, 12 years ago either. So. And I mean, one of the great ironies is that Robert Deleuze, CEO of Porter, Brian, you know this, right, has said that it's cheaper for us to fly out of Pearson.
I think that's changed. I think, as was noted earlier in the lawsuit between Newport and Porter, Newport won and got a judgment of $131 million against Porter, but it was appealed and settled. So we think the settlement involved reducing the charges that Newport charges Porter. Somewhere in there, Newport had to give way, but it was a stunner that Newport actually won that. And what that lawsuit gave us was insight into what's going on in Porter. And in their letters back and forth that were disclosed in the litigation, Porter admitted that it was losing money at the island airport in serious amounts. One year, before COVID, one year was $40 million, another was $39 million. It's a lot of money. They were not doing well, and they're doing far better at Pearson.
Yes, I know my youngest just flew back from visiting his girlfriend on Porter and landed at Pearson, which which was, so Tony made another excellent point, and and that is something I think I referred to it earlier. I know that, and I know Paul Bedford's referred to it, but I think it is important for us to develop messaging and reports that highlight the importance, economic importance of ongoing revitalization on the economic value of Toronto Island Park, as Tony was right to, and I know I just popped in there and said it's, so 2025, approximately 1.5 million visitors to the island. It's sort of, zooming back up towards and on track potentially, if we get those new electric ferries, to exceed pre-COVID levels, right? So it is a huge draw. And of course, that's the other thing too. When people, I know several people in the chat have mentioned the need to talk to people, and I know Councillor Matlow mentioned it as well, beyond the central waterfront and the immediate downtown core. But, if we take a look at who goes to Toronto Island Park, it's people from all over the city and beyond. It is, in fact, just as Sunnyside was, in prehistoric times, the Muskoka, for those who are working people who can't afford to go to Muskoka, Toronto Island Park is that for many, many, many people.
And Ed, I would add that if we're successful and the airport ceases to operate and that becomes park, that adds a whole 1/3 to the island park in terms of area. It's a massive expansion of the island park, which will be wonderful. The same way Chicago did with Meigs Field, and Edmonton is
And
doing with its downtown airport. Santa Monica is doing with its airport. Lots of
Berlin
cities have done that.
and
Berlin,
Berlin is,
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, and actually we may invite it, I mean, from a nonpartisan perspective, it's an interesting idea, but you remember that we did have those folks from the architects on a previous speaker series. And if you go to waterfrontforall.ca, you can find recordings of all our previous, I think almost all our previous speaker series, which is, dare we imagine the island without a park? And there were those lovely drawings of what you could do with canals and parkland and some additional recreational facilities, repurposing some of the existing buildings at the airport. And now I think it may be a long shot, perhaps might be a long shot, bit of an outsider candidate for the Ontario Liberal Party's leadership race. But a gentleman named Eric Lombardi, who was the founder of More Neighbours Toronto, a pro-housing advocacy group, and Eric has spoken at a previous, as a panelist at a previous speaker series about the importance of maximizing housing and affordable housing and how that ties together at Oakwoman, Minising. He has embraced the idea of going beyond the airport as part of his talking points in his leadership campaign for the Ontario Liberal Party. So I just thought I'd throw that out there. So it's nice to see, it's like everyone's welcome to join the conversation, and it's interesting to see people, especially younger people under 40, taking up these ideas. Ed, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to get into I've spoken to many politicians about it, of course, and we've always found that if you talk about closing the island airport, they stop listening. It's people are negative about that. I've spoken to Chi, and she will make several speeches in a single meeting saying the airport is very important, so on and so forth. And so you learn pretty quickly that you should just concentrate on the jets. Don't talk about the ultimate issue, the ultimate, well-being of the airport. And that was certainly the case when City Council was looking at whether to extend RISA. At that time, this is in October of 2024. It's good to remember that city staff, there were two things really before City Council. One was, shall we build these runway and safety areas, which were mandated by federal regulations. So there wasn't a lot of choice. They really had to be kind of built, and they had to be built fast because there was a deadline coming up in 2027 to do it. The other thing that was that Porter was saying, or not Porter, but the Toronto Port Authority was saying, well, we want an extension on the lease from 2033 to 2045, which they ultimately were successful in getting. But the city staff report, quite a long, thoughtful thing, dated, I believe, October, or maybe it was November of 2024, said, well, that's really a separate issue. We should look at that. Whether we should extend the lease should be something we should have a holistic review. We'll look at that another time. And before we do that, we should do studies on the airport, whether it's good, whether it's bad, who likes it, who uses it, and just think about it for kind of in the context of thinking about the next 50 years. And that was, I think, a really well-considered recommendation of city staff. But it was rejected quite soundly by City Council. Now it's interesting, which was unfortunate, but that's the way they voted. They've been heavily lobbied, and as I say, it's kind of it's the third rail. It seems you can't say we should close down the airport, or nobody will take you seriously. It's a kind of a idea that it's you just simply are not allowed to say it. However, it is worthwhile remembering that the EA was delayed. It only came out in March of this year, after 9 years almost. It had been completed years before, and it was only actually when Brian there put in an FOI request and waited for quite a while, and eventually it just suddenly appeared one day. And it said a bunch of interesting things. So remember that when City Council was deciding, should we do a holistic review of the airport, councillors, as far as I know, did not have the benefit of that EA and the kinds of things that it said. it said a lot of things that were quite interesting. One of the things that it said about the public health effects, remember, this is the Toronto Port Authority's own experts saying this. It said the EA said that the public health effects of the airport, either with jets or without it, included, and I'm quoting here, sound levels could result in hypertension and ischemic health disease. Quote, increased risks of respiratory illness. Quote, increased risk of cardiopulmonary and lung cancer. Quote, increased risk of developing lesions in the upper airways and nasal lesions. Quote, increased risk of developing a respiratory tract tumors. I was a litigator in the courts for 30 years. This is the most devastating document I've ever seen emerge. It was suppressed for that vote of city council. What would the councillors, how might they have voted had they been aware of this information, which they weren't? It's something to think about. We're dealing with an entity on our waterfront that I would submit is cagey, shall we say. It's modest with the truth. That's a quote from Churchill, I think it was.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Just Ed.
And so I'll just
has a
leave
hand
that
up.
thought there. Is that I'll just leave my comment there, I think.
Okay, great. Pam, hi. Everyone,
Hi.
Pam Mazza. I'm just going to introduce you a bit. So Pam is well known to Toronto Island residents, and Pam is on the board of Waterfront for All. So hi, Pam.
Thank you. I'm finding this need to have the final plan in place before any decisions can be made. Curious, in 2015, nobody needed the final plan. It was the idea. Nobody had actually done any of the research that has been done by many of us here. And yet, everybody's waiting. And I'm trying to figure out why anybody who's thinking about this, who has even a moderate amount of information, would support jets at the airport. And why is the federal government not just realizing that it would be ridiculous and end it like Mark Garneau did in 2015 with a tweet? So I can't figure that out. I do know that aside from Nieuport, I suspect the Port Authority themselves are really lobbying for this, because Brian and Eiler will also remember that back then it was the Port Authority who got Porter going on the airport because the port was failing and they could not continue with a failing airport because they were in the red. The only financially successful part of the port is the Harbour, Outer Harbour Marina. So that's how Porter and the jets and all of this got started. So I guess it's so obvious. I mean, Cheese heard from all of us about the horrible things that will happen to this waterfront. Why any politician would accept this in Toronto is totally beyond me. So I don't know. Does anybody, Mark, I don't know if you have some ideas about this, or Paul.
Well, I don't have any deep insights, but if I mean the difference maybe here is that Doug Ford has come out so strongly in support of it. So if you're sitting in the federal government and you shut this down, you've just picked a big fight with Doug Ford. And if you're looking at it and you're saying this thing is ridiculous, it'll probably collapse of its own weight. There's no reason to go out early and annoy Doug Ford. Let the process come out. Let the public rage come out. Let there be the technical studies, and eventually that kind of rationality will prevail. But if you come out right now, you're picking a fight with Doug. And what's the upside of that?
Well, and I want to point out to everyone, it's so damn annoying. but as someone, as an undergraduate political science student, was made to read the Constitution backwards and forwards and review key constitutional cases for their political impact, I remind everyone that we are a federal system. And why would the federal government want to do business with Doug Ford? Because without Doug Ford, there's no cooperation. There's no national child care program in Ontario. There's no expansion of pharmacare. There's no, the list goes on housing, which is entirely constitutionally except for the weird thing about CMHC and some financing rules, it is constitutionally a provincial responsibility, and our provinces are sovereign within most of their constitutional responsibilities. So if you want to get stuff done, you need a cooperation of the premiers if you're the federal government, not on everything, but on most things. And so, yes, I think that Mark is actually, I think Mark's insight it's annoying, it's frustrating as hell, but I think it has a great deal of merit. You sort of have to balance, they have to balance things out. And I think remember, Mark Carney said that Trump was a transformative president. Well, he is, isn't he? Perhaps not in the way one would wish, right? Carney has a way of speaking when he says things, oh, that sounds interesting. I don't think it necessarily means what people think it means, but I understand why everyone's frustrated. I get it completely. I'm frustrated. I wish they'd just say, forget it. But I think Mark is onto it. And there's no getting around the way this country works. You can't hand wave away the Constitution. We tried that a couple of times with Meech Lake and Charlottetown. Some of you may remember, and it didn't go so well. It is what it is. There's no getting around it, and they have multiple. The federal government has massive amounts of things they want to get done. Some of which we may agree with, some of us may not. But I think that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be going out and telling our MPs what we think and what we feel and what we know and what good information is out there. And no, don't assume they've read the ACOM EA from 2015. Don't assume they've read, or 2017. Don't assume they've read the 2015 Oliver Wyman study. Don't assume that they're conversant with the TP, with the Transport Canada 5th edition regulations. I mean, most of us actually aren't. I'm sure none of us could cite, well, some of us probably could, but if only a very few of us could cite them, verbatim. So I think, part of it is education, advocacy, persistence, and yeah, it's frustrating, but I think we should be positive about the long-term ability to make the case. And no, it won't happen overnight. I mean, Ford could do horrible things. And those of you who because again, provinces have absolute total authority over their municipalities in the final instance. I mean, and that's just, again, that's section 92. Now, there are some exemptions. Brian and Ed can probably talk from a legal standpoint. There are some ways to try to work around that, and there are some appeals, and there are some ways that even the Supreme Court has at least, kind of considered. But basically, going in, you should assume that if a provincial government, any provincial government, wants to radically reshape its cities and towns, it pretty much can. Again, because they didn't think cities and towns were important in 1867.
Yeah, just to add to that, I mean, I've seen a number of comments in the chat about Ontario Place and the Science Center, and there are two key differences here. One is the federal ownership of land in the airport, and the other is one of the areas where the Supreme Court has repeatedly asserted federal authority is over aviation. So the feds do have complete authority over aviation. Transport Canada can overrule Doug Ford. That's one of the areas where the feds have power.
Can I jump in and make another point?
Please, Brian.
Whatever happens with jets, it's going to cost a fortune. We know 1 billion, 2 billion. There's not going to be, that's not easily sourced from the private sector. No one's going to invest that kind of money in the airport when, as Marcus has talked about, it's a failing business. So the money's going to have to come from the government. And we do know that the Port Authority was set up back in the late 1990s with a view to port authorities generally being financially autonomous and independent. And if you look at the debates around the Canada Marine Act back at that time, every politician says, well, this means we no longer have to subsidize port authorities, whether this operation of ports or operation of an airport in the case of Toronto. We need to go back to those debates and establish that principle as a principle here, that no public money should be spent on this airport.
Right? Yeah. Yes. I think that's, if
Yep.
there's, after all, if there were a business case for it.
Exactly.
Okay, well, look, everyone, thank you very much. I'm going to point out that it's 9 o'clock. I appreciate it. I also want to thank all of you who are here. I probably should have done this at the outset. I apologize for that. If I missed someone, I want to thank everyone who's made a contribution to Waterfront for All. We exist, on volunteer labor, and I'm happy to say that our budget is not tremendously high, but we do have, it costs us a few $100 every month to keep our Nation Builder website and our, communication system up and running. And we also look forward to having some in-person events, which inevitably cost more, even if we get a great deal or even sort of free on venue rentals. So we look forward to that. We are going to be doing more of these. We are going to announce very soon something I think we're thinking of about a month from now, early June. We have many more topics to explore. And, as we know, our dear friend Norm and the No Jets TO team are obviously solely focused, as they ought to be, on opposing jets of Billy Bishop. Some of you may know that Waterfront for All doesn't always take a specific advocacy position, because we think part of our mandate is encouragement of accessibility, sustainability, and positive revitalization of our waterfront. But we do, in this case, take exception, as you gathered, to jets at the airport, because we feel it puts everything we support at risk and everything we agree with at risk. A clean, accessible, enjoyable, and revitalized waterfront. And I hope most of you, if not everyone, shares that. We look forward to your ongoing support. Visit us at waterfrontforall.ca. We are back on X. I wish to say it weren't true. We did experiment, and we may pop back up again on the Blue Sky social app. But unfortunately, despite all its myriad evils and problems, the X, formerly known as Twitter, is still where the balance of discourse happens to be in that particular type of social media platform. And so we've come back with a new handle there called @WaterfrontAll. And we join our friends No Jets TO and others, and Parks Not Planes there. And we welcome you to come follow us and come back and see us again soon. We'll be reaching out and announcing our next speaker series in June. And we also hope to do some walks again, which we've done successfully. So look forward to that. Thank you all. Good night. Keep the faith. Bye.